Thanks, everybody. Good morning. So this is really what I've been nerding out on the last year or so. I found out about Bitcoin in 2012, and at first you think it's a currency, and you get excited by the fact that here's a currency that can't be manipulated, that's completely transparent. But soon you realize that Bitcoin's more than a currency, it's a payment network. And this payment network lets me send money all around the world instantly with the click of a button. And that's really interesting. But as you go up the learning curve, the third thing you realize is this is more than a payment network. This is more than a currency. This is actually a new model for building projects. And so that's what I ended up describing in this white paper about decentralized applications, is what I think the 4 keys are to the success of the Bitcoin model. And so real briefly, I'll just go over those 4. I think part of the reason it's caught on so much is this is an open source project. It's not a proprietary company, it's not a proprietary standard. This is something that everybody can contribute to as a developer, as a coder, as somebody that wants to add to the network. And that openness really made it powerful. It's similar if you look at the early days of the internet, there were a lot of competing technologies. What won out at the end of the day was HTTP because it was an open standard, no one company owned it, and that gave it appeal to a very broad audience. And so I think that's the first key you have to understand, is the future is in building open source projects. But it just wasn't any open source project. It had a new innovation. It had this digital token attached, that you needed this digital token to access this application. If you try to send Bitcoin across the Bitcoin network, you can't use Litecoin, you can't use Feathercoin, you can't use any other coin. Only Bitcoin is recognized as a valid transaction to go across the payment rails, if you will, of the Bitcoin payment network. And that really gave this open source project a price and a value, because all of a sudden you had a limited supply of these tokens, and as more and more people began using the payment network, all of a sudden there was more and more demand for this limited number of tokens. And so over time, as there's more adoption, you see the value of Bitcoin increase over time. And there'll be fluctuations, but if you look at a comparison to something like Metcalfe's law and the network effect, there's a pretty high correlation between adoption of this payment network and the value of the currency. So that's the second thing. It had a digital token that gave these features and access to this application a market price. The third big innovation was the fact that this is all peer-to-peer. There is no center. All the records are spread around the network. Everybody has a copy of the Bitcoin ledger, all the transactions that have happened. And this is really a great way to prevent a central point of failure. If you have a central server, at some point it will get hacked, or it will be taken over, or it'll go down because the power goes out. Here you had a structure where tens of thousands of nodes have a copy of all the Bitcoin transactions, and it is built an incredibly resilient network that keeps operating. So that's the third item, decentralization and storage of all this data. And the fourth is the idea that we're going to connect this system to a proof of work. Now, this proof of work serves as a consensus mechanism that says we can cryptographically prove that a particular node has added value to the network. And in the case of Bitcoin, all the miners are adding security to the network by adding more hashing power. As many of you probably know, the only way to falsify a transaction on the Bitcoin network is to have at least 51% of the network power. And so by incentivizing miners to add more and more power to the network, you protect the network from bad actors, whether they companies or nation states or malicious miners that might want to mess with the network. That's become largely impossible due to the scope and scale of the hashing power now applied to the network. So these 4 things, again, the idea that it's built on open source, not a proprietary standard. It's got a digital token to monetize the use of that application. It's got decentralized storage of all its records, and it has a consensus mechanism, has made Bitcoin this incredible monumental force in its own development. It's attracted some of the most brilliant people in the world. It's attracted tens of thousands of miners to contribute to it. But the interesting part for me was this idea that this isn't just a one-off. Bitcoin isn't the only thing that could ever use this model, but instead, that this was a general theory for we can build decentralized applications like Bitcoin that are doing things other than currency and other than payments. So I'm not talking about alternative coins that are doing other payment networks or other currencies. I mean applying this model to different parts of and different technical verticals. And so I started imagining, what if you could reward people for contributing storage to a cloud? So sort of like the reverse of Dropbox. Instead of getting charged to store things in the cloud, what if I could get paid to put my extra computer space onto the cloud? And I got paid in the form of a digital token. And you use this Bitcoin model where everybody in the network was a node. That would be radically cheaper than Dropbox or Google or other storage solutions today. And I began thinking generally, oh, we can apply this not only to storage, but to computer power, to bandwidth and sharing the internet. And it really opens up this whole suite of infrastructure level applications and protocols that can be built if you apply the economics of this model and you structure it in the correct way. And so rather than just kind of droning on and on about this idea, I wanted to bring up a good friend with me today, David Irvine from MaidSafe. This is a group that has an incredible technology for cloud storage, and they've been working on this for years, and they've just launched a token that's going to monetize their system. And so I want to bring somebody out that's actually putting this into practice. So please welcome David Irvine.
Hi, David. Thanks very much.
Absolutely.
I hope this mic works for Scottish accent, but yeah, we actually spent 8 years looking at decentralizing all internet services, very much like David's saying. Take Dropbox, reverse it. Take Google, reverse it. The data's yours. And really what we are doing is taking all of the computers that we all own, connect them together into a cyber brain, and then allow people to access that cyber brain. And that choice is theirs and theirs alone. There's no spying, there's no ability to monitor things. So this really was quite a difficult task for us because building the system was inordinately difficult, but how do you explain decentralization? And then Bitcoin came along, then David came along, and that part started taking care of itself. So we've really now got a system where you can download something like Dropbox or YouTube or anything, start using it free of charge, and the system pays you money. So this is open source that earns you money. And this turns everything on its head. This turns the whole system on its head. So not only are you now secure and safe and anonymous on a network, that there's a currency underlying this network. The currency is Safecoin. Safecoin will pay people to contribute resources. Importantly, Safecoin will pay developers to develop applications. So you create an application, the network will pay you in Safecoin if that application is used. So really, I think this is where BitAngels and the community work for us perfectly. That we can take all of the world's network resources, give them to all of the people of the world, and satisfy the, I think you could describe it, the inevitability of what's to come. And that inevitability is we own the net. Nobody else, just us. And I've got to thank David for not only being involved in this, but actually making this a reality. And so thanks, David.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. All right, guys. So we've got some time set aside for Q&A. So I think we have a mic that's available for folks. If we can get that ready, we'll open it up to everybody. Love to hear your questions, either about decentralized applications in general, about MaidSafe in specific, and sort of what we see coming in this new year with this new model. So raise your hand if you got a question. We've got the mic right over here.
Who's got a question?
Who's got the first one?
Not everybody at once, please.
We got one right up here in the front.
22nd of April, we are launching.
Oh.
I was just asking when are you going to launch?
Yeah, at the moment we're launching a testnet on the 22nd of April, just around about that time, as well as a crowdfunding participation. So we really want everyone to be part of this. So 10% of all Safecoin is going to be available for hopefully as many people as possible. That will last about 6 weeks.
Right, and just to add a little more detail to that, this is essentially a crowd sale, a pre-sale of the MaidSafe software, if you will, that's available to everyone. Anybody will be able to contribute Bitcoin or Mastercoin that they want to support the development of these features. And like David said, they'll end up spread out across all the people that do the contributions, about 10% of the safe coins that'll ever exist.
And can you contribute besides Bitcoin or Mastercoin with disk space?
Pardon? Sorry?
Can I contribute with disk space instead of Bitcoin?
Yes, absolutely. The whole point is that people can get involved very early. But all of us who have a computer, as soon as you switch on that computer and any of the MaidSafe type applications, we are calling it now Project Safe. So we are taking all of the 8 years of work that we've done and giving it to everyone. So it's not ours anymore. Anyone becomes not a miner, but a farmer, because you're looking after a valuable resource. So rather than, Bitcoin had to burn electricity to prove worth. And what we are doing is saying, look after our data, and we'll pay you.
And maybe that's a good distinction, is with here in the safe system,
Yep.
there's no wasted resource or electricity
Yep.
when you're doing that process of generating the tokens. It's all based on how much storage you're actually storing for the network. And so there's no waste whatsoever in the system. It's directly how much resource you're providing to the network.
Hi. So with these, decentralized autonomous companies, am I right?
Decentralized applications. There's a few
okay.
terms floating around.
Sorry, yeah, everything's in this semantic war.
Sure.
I guess, what do you see, or I'm sure you're discussing this, as far as any legal issues or any new legal issues that you might face, only because I guess we've been talking about it a bunch this week if you've been at some of the other conventions.
Sure. No, it's a great question. So the issue is what regulatory bucket this sort of falls into. And an example I'd like to use is, let's say I wanted to create a video game. And I'm a developer, and I say, hey, anybody that wants to contribute to my video game can send some Bitcoin to this address. And when the video game is ready, it'll take me 3 months to program it. When it's ready, all the people that contributed will get passwords to the video game. And that's your reward. And the reason I think this is a very helpful analogy for what we're doing here is when you think about a digital token, it literally is a password. A private key is your password to access this application. And so we're going to see a wave of groups that are essentially falling into the category of pre-selling software. And that's why we're calling it crowd sale, I think is probably the most accurate term, for we're letting anybody participate in buying this software, and everybody gets the digital token that will let them access that software. And of course, the value of the token is dependent on whether the software is useful. It may go up, it may go down. It all depends on whether it's a little niche software that only the people that support it want, or if it's a big platform that lots of people will want. But I think when you talk about that as that token as an asset, it probably falls under capital gains. Not many jurisdictions yet have really given guidance on this particular use case, but I think what we'll see is more and more jurisdictions seeing it as software sales and as capital gains. At least that's our hope, given we think that's the most accurate reflection of what these systems are doing and how they're rewarding people. There is no company, there are no shares, there are no dividends, there are no profits. It's only in the utility of the application that the token has any value. The password is only valuable to those people that want to play the game, if you will. That would be my understanding. Maybe you want to speak a little about the nonprofit nature of what you're doing, and I think that'd help as well.
Yeah, MaidSafe started off and 50% of the company was given away to a charity to begin with. So when we looked at what we're doing, we're saying, well, we're re-implementing the internet. How can we possibly own that? And that was a big issue for us. So how can we get people to invest in us, and then how can they get a return if we give the whole thing away? And I think that's part of the power of what we are doing. We are saying that the giving makes us stronger. Because if we all can work in an internet that's completely secure, anonymous, and use things like Safecoin to transact, it changes all the rules. We can't own it, so this ownership has to be the decentralization is not only in regulation and rubbish in the middle, like large server farms. The decentralization is giving control back to the people. And from day one, we really were concerned that how do we get control to the people? And the currency is perfect. So we don't own the currency. You guys do. Well, we're all going to be buying some, but everybody does.
We have time for 2 more questions.
It's a two-part question. From my understanding, there's a ability to embed like a wallet address in a piece of open source software.
Yeah.
Right. So, what kind of early adopters do you think are going to be using that? Because that's revolutionary when it comes to open source projects and monetizing them.
Very good. Well, maybe you want to talk about
Yeah.
Storage is one of the groups that has been on the developer list and been looking at the MaidSafe network. They're probably a good first example of
Yeah.
third-party application that will use this type of reward where they can embed their address in the software. Based on how many people use the software, they get part of the coins that are generated, if you will.
Yeah, the 10% of the mining rate goes to builders, we call them. So the farmers are looking after the resource, and the builders are the application providers, but that's just anybody. So if you thought, I think maybe a great idea would be a publishing system, just build it, and if it's valuable, you get paid. And the network's paying you at a rate that's it's done through a sort of sigmoid curve. So as people use the system more, the development partner or the developer gets more money for it. And when you put your wallet address in, it's encoded in an immutable fashion. So nobody can change that. So open source companies can now, for the first time, provide something that's of value, and we don't force those developers to turn into support people or consultants. If you're great at building things, build them. The system will reward you. It's very important.
Last question.
I think the idea of decentralizing storage is really revolutionary and great. I'd like to know who the liability falls on for the information that's stored. Is it the person storing it, the farmer, as you say, or the person sending it to these?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Sure.
There's actually no information stored. It's a debate that we have a lot. What happens to the data is it's chopped up into millions of pieces. All of those pieces of a file, parts of one chunk encrypt the next chunk. Then there's an obfuscation process. So what's actually on your machine is something that can't be decrypted except by the person that created those shards. It's like taking a file, making it into sand and throwing it onto the beaches. We don't know who did what. Yeah, so the network itself can't decrypt that information. But it's really, there's a lot to it because people say, you know, bad things are going to happen here. There's safe coin things like cash. You can't tell that I've given you a coin, so it is like cash. And myself and my colleague Nick were talking about that this morning, saying, but this is what we have to think decentralized, turn it on its head. Criminality can be fixed not by the police, but by us. If we know that there's a criminal here and we've got a network that we can report that person completely anonymously and privately, we, the people, stop the criminality. It's very important to look at everything backwards and look at everything decentralized. We hold the power, not organizations. Ants don't have a police force. They work very well.
Very good. Sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Good stuff.